What happens when a heartless billionaire crosses paths with a forgotten war hero? In a quiet town no one's ever heard of, one man's arrogance ignites a storm that even money can't control. But when dawn breaks, Seabrook will never be the same. The town of Seabrook woke to the quiet hum of waves crashing against the rocks and the faint scent of salt in the cool morning air. It was a coastal village forgotten by time, where locals still left their doors unlocked, and the bakery's bell rang at exactly 7:30 each morning. In the heart of this simplicity stood a weathered stretch of farmland owned by Thomas Bronson, though around here no one called him that. To the folks of Seabrook, he was just Tom. Tom was 70 years old, his skin sun-hardened like old leather, his hands rough and scarred by decades of labor. His farm wasn't much to look at. A modest two-story house with chipped white paint, fields of corn and wheat, and a rickety old barn that leaned like it might topple with the next heavy wind. But to Tom, it was everything. This land was his father's and his father's before that. It wasn't valuable in dollars and cents, but it was steeped in memory. That morning had begun like any other. Tom woke before dawn, his bones groaning with every movement as he dressed in his usual faded flannel and worn jeans. He brewed coffee on the rusted stovetop, the smell filling the kitchen as the first light stretched across the horizon. Outside, he fed the chickens, mended a fence rail, and loaded a basket of fresh vegetables into his old pickup, a '78 Ford that coughed to life with a stubborn rattle. As the sun climbed higher, Tom paused to wipe sweat from his brow and gaze out over his crops. Corn stalks rustled in the breeze, the wheat fields shimmered like liquid gold, and he felt that familiar, grounding peace. He was about to head into town when a deep, unnatural roar split the air. Tom's head jerked up, his gut tightening. The sound grew louder, an engine, but not one he recognized. He shielded his eyes against the glare of the sun, scanning the clear blue sky. Then he saw it. A private jet, sleek and silver, descending far too low. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, dropping his basket. The aircraft cut through the air with an arrogant grace, as though the laws of gravity and courtesy didn't apply to it. Its landing gear extended, and Tom's stomach dropped. The bastard wasn't just flying low, he was about to land. "No, no, no, you son of a—" The jet's wheels touched down, tearing through the wheat field, flattening crops that had taken months to cultivate. Dirt and broken stalks flew up in thick clouds as the plane skidded across the field, its engines whining with casual, ruthless indifference. A fence post splintered under the nose of the plane, sending shards flying. Tom stumbled back, his chest pounding. The jet rolled to a stop just yards from his barn. The engines idled with an arrogant purr. A few heartbeats later, the cabin door lowered like a smug grin, and down stepped a man who looked as though he belonged to an entirely different species. Richard Van Thorpe. Tom didn't need an introduction. He'd seen the name on billboards advertising luxury resorts, offshore investment firms, and real estate developments that promised to redefine coastal living. Van Thorpe was a billionaire. Young, tanned, teeth too perfect, hair styled like he'd stepped out of a men's magazine. He wore an immaculate linen suit despite the dust, and a pair of sunglasses that probably cost more than Tom's entire property. "Well," Richard announced, adjusting his cufflinks and grinning at no one in particular. "That's one way to make an entrance." Tom stormed forward, his hands balled into fists. "You just destroyed my crops," he barked. "You landed a goddamn plane on my farm." Richard turned toward him as though only just noticing Tom's existence. He smiled, a slow, condescending curl of the lips. "Relax, old-timer," Richard drawled. "I had to set her down somewhere. Airspace over the bay's a mess. Besides, it's not like you're growing anything important. What is this, wheat? Corn? Cute. This is my land," Tom growled. "You'll pay for every inch you tore up. You hear me, boy?" Richard laughed, an easy, dismissive sound that made Tom's blood boil. "Listen, Grandpa, I'll be out of your charming little dirt patch in a few hours. Until then, keep your pants on." He gestured toward one of his assistants, a thin, nervous-looking man in a suit. "Get legal on the line. I want to know what the hell kind of laws let some backwater farmer claim exclusive rights to a flyover zone." You better believe there's laws, Tom snapped. And you just broke 'em. Richard took a step closer, lowering his voice, his smile never reaching his eyes. Tell you what, old man, you make one phone call, I'll bury you in court. You think your quaint little field means anything to me? One lawsuit, and I'll own this entire dump before sundown. Tom's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Around them, a handful of townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the jet's landing. Sheriff Dempsey stood at a distance, chewing his lip and avoiding Tom's gaze. The mayor, a plump man named Harlan Tate, kept nervously wringing his hands. None of them moved to intervene. They were afraid. Everyone knew Richard Vanthorpe's reach. He owned half the land around Seabrook already. Every job, every bank loan, every road repair passed through one of his companies. Crossing him was bad for business, bad for families. Tom felt it then, the loneliness of standing alone in a town he'd served his whole life. You can keep your empty threats, Tom spat, but you'll clean this mess up, or so help me. Or what? Richard said smoothly, leaning in. You'll swing a rake at me? You'll what, call the National Guard? Face it, Grandpa, this is progress, and you're in the way. He turned and walked back toward his jet, already pulling out his phone. A few of his entourage trailed behind, snickering. Tom stood in the wreckage of his crops, his heart thudding like a war drum. Around him, no one spoke. No one even met his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. He was something colder, something sharper. Tom Bronson was a man who'd fought in deserts halfway across the world. He'd seen men bleed out under foreign suns, watched governments forget the promises made to soldiers. He knew what it felt like to be discarded, to be deemed obsolete. But this was his home, and no one was taking it from him, not without a fight. Night fell fast over Seabrook. Out by Tom Bronson's farm, the sky deepened to an indigo canvas streaked with fading gold, the ocean's breath carrying a chill inland. The town's lights flickered to life one by one, but the fields remained in darkness, save for the pale moonlight casting silver threads over broken crops and the deep ruts left by Vanthorpe's jet. Tom sat alone on his porch, a bottle of rye whiskey balanced between his knees. He hadn't bothered with a glass. The old wooden steps creaked under his weight as he leaned forward, staring at the wreckage of his field. The land had always spoken to him. He could read it like a book, when the rain was coming by the smell of the soil, when the wheat was thirsty by the way the leaves hung, when a storm would roll in from the coast by the restless flight of gulls. But tonight, the earth was silent, bruised, mute. He took another swallow of whiskey, feeling it burn down to his gut. In the distance, Vanthorpe's jet sat gleaming under floodlights brought in by his crew. Generators hummed, and a small army of men in black jackets worked around it, unpacking equipment, driving stakes into the ground, setting up temporary fences like they meant to stay. Tom's jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. A truck rattled down the dirt road toward his house, headlights cutting across the field. It was Sheriff Dempsey's rig, an old Dodge with more rust than paint. Tom watched it approach, his grip tightening around the neck of the bottle. The truck stopped at the bottom of the drive. Dempsey stepped out, adjusting his belt, his silhouette sharp against the headlights. He was a thick-set man with a gut that hung over his holster and a face lined by years of compromise. "Evenin', Tom," Dempsey called softly. Tom didn't answer. The sheriff sighed, climbing the steps and lowering himself into the chair beside Tom's. He took off his hat, setting it on his knee. For a while, neither man spoke. "You got folks in town worried," Dempsey said eventually. "About what?" Tom asked, his voice a dry rasp. "About me not rollin' over like a dog?" Dempsey rubbed a hand down his face. "Ain't that simple. Vanthorpe's connected. He's already been on the phone to the mayor, the county, hell, even the state rep. He says his plane had an emergency, had to land somewhere. Said it's temporary. Claims he's within his rights under some emergency aviation clause." Tom snorted. "Emergency, my ass. Don't matter much what we think," Dempsey said quietly. "He's got the paperwork lined up. Lawyers in suits sharper than butcher knives. Harlan's tellin' folks to stand down. Says it's progress. That what you call it, Cal?" Tom turned to him, his gaze hard as iron. Progress. Dempsey's shoulders slumped. I ain't here to fight you, Tom. I'm here to keep folks from getting hurt. From you getting hurt. I've been hurt before. Not like this. Tom leaned back, looking out at the jet. Its floodlights cast long, hungry shadows across the land. He saw men moving equipment, setting up what looked like soil testing rigs and survey markers. Not the kind of thing you'd bring in for a one-night emergency stop. What's he doing out there? Tom asked. Dempsey hesitated, then said, Word is, he's planning a resort. Tom's blood went cold. A resort. Yup. Private airstrip. Luxury marina. Says the coast'll bring in high-end tourists. Wants to buy up the surrounding properties. I ain't selling. Dempsey's voice dropped to a near whisper. He ain't a skin, Tom. The words hung heavy between them. The hum of the generators, the distant hiss of the surf, the soft click of cicadas in the grass. All of it felt louder in the wake of that truth. Tom downed another swallow of whiskey. You remember Fallujah? Tom asked suddenly. Dempsey blinked. What? Fallujah. 2004. We were there together, weren't we? Yeah, Dempsey said carefully. What about it? You remember what we did when those Merc contractors rolled in, tried to muscle the locals? Shake 'em down for what little they had. Dempsey's face darkened. That was a long time ago. Not long enough for me. Tom stood slowly, his bones aching, and walked to the edge of the porch. His eyes swept the darkened fields, the unfamiliar equipment, the men moving like shadows through his land. I didn't come back to let some punk rich boy steal what my daddy built, Tom said. What his daddy built. Dempsey's voice was tight. Don't do anything stupid, Tom. Tom didn't answer. He turned and went inside, leaving the sheriff alone on the porch. Inside the house, the air was thick with dust and old memories. Framed photographs lined the mantel. A younger Tom in fatigues, his arm around a grinning, sunburned Dempsey. His father leaning on a pitchfork, squinting against the sun. A black and white of his mother in a summer dress, holding a basket of apples. Tom set the whiskey down and crossed the living room to an old chest in the corner. He knelt, his joints protesting, and pulled it open. Inside lay relics of a life lived hard. Medals tarnished by time, letters from men long gone, a faded flag folded tight, and a weapon, an old M1911 pistol, its surface worn, but cleaned and oiled, ready even after all these years. Tom ran his fingers over it. He wasn't a man prone to rash acts, but there was a difference between rash and resolute. He holstered the pistol at his side, grabbed an old canvas duffel from the closet, and began packing. Not much, a flashlight, extra magazines, a combat knife, a coil of rope, a flare gun. He was going hunting, not for blood, not yet, but for leverage. Outside, the land waited, broken, silent, and Tom Bronson, soldier of forgotten wars, was ready to remind it, and the man who trespassed upon it, that some ground was worth defending, even if you had to stand alone. Seabrook didn't sleep that night. The quiet little town by the water, the one where nothing ever happened, where the biggest excitement was a Friday fish fry or a harvest dance, lay awake in restless silence. A heaviness settled over the place, like the humidity before a storm you could feel in your teeth. Folks peeked through curtains, saw the floodlights out by Tom Bronson's fields, and whispered to one another on landline phones or over back fences. Everyone knew something was coming. At Vanthorpe's impromptu camp, the activity never slowed. Machinery beeped softly as drones lifted into the air, their red lights flickering like digital fireflies. Portable labs glowed blue through canvas flaps, and men in black windbreakers moved soil samples, unrolled blueprints, and spoke in clipped, efficient voices. They weren't locals. That much was obvious. Their shoes were too clean. Their eyes didn't glance up at the night sky to check the weather. And they carried themselves with the smug indifference of men who expected obedience. One man among them, however, was different. Dane Mercer. Dane was Vanthorpe's fixer, a tall, sharp-featured man with ice-blue eyes and a voice like cold glass. He wasn't a soldier, but he'd worn a badge once, a federal one, until Vanthorpe found a better use for him. Where lawyers wrote contracts and PR men spun stories, Mercer handled the work that couldn't be filed or televised. He moved through the camp like a phantom, unnoticed but everywhere, listening. He found Vanthorpe in a makeshift command tent, seated at a fold-out table cluttered with maps and legal documents. Vanthorpe's hair was perfect, his custom-tailored jacket unwrinkled, a tumbler of expensive scotch in his manicured hand. He was watching a live satellite feed of the coastline on a tablet, expression cool. "We've had some resistance," Mercer reported. Vanthorpe didn't look up. "Tom Bronson," Mercer nodded. "Refused the buyout. Sheriff Dempsey's no use. Town council's on the fence. Then break them. Won't be easy. This place is tight-knit. Old blood. You push too hard, you risk sparking something public." Vanthorpe smiled faintly. "You worry too much, Dane. This isn't Syria, it's a pissant fishing town. Men like Bronson, they bluster, they threaten, and then they fold when you squeeze their accounts or ruin their reputations. It's a formula." Mercer said nothing. Vanthorpe took a slow sip of his scotch, savoring it. "We've done this in 7 other towns. This one won't be different." But Mercer wasn't so sure. Out in the darkness beyond the floodlights, something moved. Tom Bronson worked by feel. He knew his land better than most men knew their own faces. Every dip, every knot in the fence line, every deer trail threading through the brush. He moved without light, crouching low in the tall grass, the duffel slung over one shoulder. He wasn't interested in sabotage, not yet. He needed information. He reached the edge of the makeshift perimeter Vanthorpe's men had set up. Portable metal fencing, maybe chest-high, held together with zip ties and hastily driven stakes. Not much of a barrier. Beyond it, generators hummed and men in tactical vests stood watch, armed with radios and sidearms. Not police, not military, private. Mercenaries by the look of them. Tom noted positions, head counts, the layout of the equipment. He moved in closer, finding a blind spot where a generator's floodlight left a wedge of shadow between 2 storage crates. He slipped through. Inside one of the tents, through a half-open flap, he caught a glimpse of something that made his stomach clench. Maps, detailed topographic layouts of Seabrook and the surrounding coastline, marked in red grease pencil. Proposed resort boundaries, excavation points, property acquisition plans. And worse, a column labeled contingencies, evictions, legal injunctions, private security force assignments, a list of names, town council members, business owners, farmers, beside each a number in thousands of dollars. Bribes. Tom's jaw clenched. He pulled a disposable camera from his duffel, an old habit from his recon days. No cell phones, no GPS pings. He snapped off half a dozen pictures in rapid succession. Then he moved to the next tent. Here, the floor was scattered with geological equipment, core samples, soil testers, sealed evidence bags. A laptop sat open on a table. Tom approached it, careful not to disturb the surface. The screen displayed a thermal map of the land beneath his farm. Annotations filled the margins. Words jumped out at him. Rare mineral deposit, extractable vein, high-value concentration. They weren't here for a resort. They were here for what lay under the land. Tom's pulse quickened. He reached for a USB stick from his pocket, a military-issue secure drive. He slid it into the laptop's port, initiating a silent data transfer. The bar crept up, second by agonizing second. Footsteps approached. Tom's instincts kicked in. He slid under the table just as 2 men entered. "Heard Vanthorpe's moving up the timeline," one muttered. "Wants the rigs here by Friday. Won't happen. Bronson's being a pain in the ass. Dempsey can't get him to back down. Then Mercer will." They laughed. One cracked a beer. Tom's heart hammered. The transfer completed with a soft chime. He pulled the USB, pocketed it, and waited. The men drifted out, still talking. Tom slipped from the tent, sticking to the shadows. He made his way to the fence line, then froze. A figure stood blocking his path. Dane Mercer. Their eyes met in the darkness. Neither moved for a long moment. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Bronson," Mercer said softly, voice like silk on broken glass. Tom didn't answer. Mercer smiled, taking a step closer. "You've been snooping. That's not neighborly. Neither's stealing a man's land." Mercer's smile faded. "You've made yourself a problem." "I've been a problem since Fallujah," Tom said, cold. He drew his M1911. Mercer didn't flinch. "You won't shoot me, Bronson." Tom thumbed the hammer back. "You sure about that?" A standoff in the moonlight, two predators weighing one another. Then Mercer stepped aside. "We'll see how long you can hold out, old man. Town's already breaking." Tom lowered the pistol, never turning his back, and slipped into the tall grass. By dawn, Tom was back in his kitchen, the USB stick plugged into his ancient laptop. The files spilled across the screen like a slow hemorrhage: land surveys, bribe ledgers, legal blackmail threats, mineral deposit evaluations. It was worse than he thought. Vanthorpe didn't just want his land. He wanted the whole damn coast. He'd already bought up 3 properties in the county under shell corporations. Anyone who resisted was getting squeezed by liens, fines, or rumors planted in the local paper. And it was working. The town council was splintering. Some too scared to stand, others too eager for a payout. Tom stared at the screen, jaw set. He scrolled to the list of bribe offers. Sheriff Cal Dempsey, $25,000. Mayor Harlan Reese, $50,000. Even the church pastor's name was there. One name was absent. He smiled, bitter and sharp. There'd be no negotiating, no compromise. Tom Bronson would fight, and Seabrook was about to remember what kind of man he truly was. By mid-morning, the storm clouds rolled in. Heavy and bruised, they gathered low over the coast, staining the sky with a gray so thick it pressed down on the land like a weight. The gulls wheeled and screamed, and somewhere far out to sea, thunder grumbled. Tom Grady stepped out onto his porch and watched the first drops fall. He could smell the rain coming, that sharp mineral scent like earth and salt. Felt right, the kind of weather men buried their dead in. The kind of storm where old debts came due. His phone buzzed. "Tom," came Mary Duval's voice, tight with nerves. She was one of the few left on the town council who hadn't taken Vanthorpe's money. "They've posted eviction notices. On your land, on mine. Dempsey says it's a lawful court order, but no one's seen a judge." Tom's lip curled. "I have what we need." "What do you mean?" "Proof. Documents. Names. I'm bringing it to the Grange Hall." There was a long pause. "You think they'll stand with you?" "They will," Tom said quietly, "if they remember who they are." He hung up and grabbed the duffel bag. Inside was the USB stick, a thick sheaf of printed copies, and the old Winchester lever action he'd kept since his father's time. The stock was worn smooth from use, the metal cold and oiled. Not for shooting, he told himself, but for making them remember. He locked the door behind him. By noon, the Grange Hall was packed. It hadn't seen this many folks since the Centennial Barbecue in '92. Old wooden benches creaked under the weight of farmers, fishermen, housewives, and mechanics. The air smelled of wet coats, coffee, and unspoken fear. Sheriff Dempsey stood near the front, arms folded. His badge looked dull in the pale light. His eyes flickered from Tom to the assembled crowd. Mayor Harlan Reese sat stiffly on the platform, jaw clenched, a sheen of sweat on his brow, a Vanthorpe man through and through. 2 others from the council beside him. And at the back of the room, flanked by 2 men in tailored suits, stood Dane Mercer. Rain glistened on his shoulders. He looked entirely at ease, as if this were just another day at the office. Tom stepped to the front. He said nothing at first. Just let the silence stretch, until the only sound was the ticking of the old clock above the entrance. Then he spoke. "I don't reckon most of you came here today for a fight." A few murmurs, some nods. "Neither did I. But sometimes a man don't get to pick his battles. Sometimes they come looking for you." He held up a folder, thick with papers. "This is what Vanthorpe's been doing. To me, to Mary Duval, to every man and woman in this town. buying up land, bribing council members, planting lies in the paper. And when that didn't work, sending men with guns. The murmurs grew louder. Tom turned to the sheriff. "Cal, your name's in here. $25,000. Same as the pastor. Same as half the damn council." Dempsey's face went red. "That's a lie." Tom dropped the papers onto the table with a heavy slap. "Anybody here can read it for themselves." He pulled the USB stick from his pocket, holding it up. "And there's more. Thermal maps. Mineral deposits under this town. That's what they're after. Not a resort. Not a beach hotel. There's a fortune buried under our feet, and they aim to take it, whether we're here or not." The room shifted. Faces changed. A fisherman named Earl Jennings stood. "Is it true, Harlan?" The mayor opened his mouth, closed it. Mercer spoke before he could. "Let's be clear," Mercer said, stepping forward, his voice carrying like steel. "What Mr. Grady has are illegally obtained documents. Sensitive, proprietary information. In the eyes of the law, that makes him a criminal. Now, we can settle this quietly, or it can get complicated." The way he said it made the hairs on Tom's neck rise. Tom didn't move. "You threaten my town and think we'll tuck our tails?" Mercer smiled faintly. "I don't think you'll have a choice." He motioned, and 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the Grange Hall. Armed men stepped out, automatic rifles. Rain pounded the roof. For a moment, no one spoke. The kind of heavy, terrible pause before a shot is fired. And then old Josie Rankin, 80 years, stood up. She held nothing but a rusted garden hoe. She didn't say a word, just glared at Mercer. Behind her, Earl picked up a length of pipe. Mary Duval's boy, barely 16, grabbed a baseball bat from under a bench. And one by one, every man and woman in that room rose. Tom watched it happen. Something raw and ancient and unkillable uncoiling inside these people. A line crossed. Mercer's eyes flicked to his men, calculating. And Tom raised his voice. "You can try it. You can bring your guns, your bribes, your papers. But you better bury every one of us before you leave. 'Cause if one stands, this town stands." He chambered a round in the Winchester with a smooth, final click. Outside, thunder cracked. The mercenaries hesitated. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. The math was wrong. A town full of angry, armed people wasn't a clean operation. Mercer's jaw clenched. He made a tiny motion with his hand. The men lowered their weapons. Tom let out a slow breath. The room erupted. Cheers, shouts, a storm of noise that rose to the rafters. Mary Duval wept. Earl laughed like a man given back his life. Sheriff Dempsey slumped in his seat, defeated. And Van Thorpe? He never came back to Seabrook. By week's end, state investigators arrived. The documents went public. A half-dozen resignations followed. Mercer vanished like smoke. The company's stock tanked. The mineral rights were ruled protected land under conservation law, no drilling, no digging. And Seabrook endured. Tom Grady stood on his porch the next evening, watching the sun set, the last orange light fading over his fields. The town was quiet again. The gulls wheeled overhead. The sea smelled clean. He took a sip of coffee, leaned against the railing, and felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. The fight was over. And this time, the old ghosts could sleep. This story reminds us that real strength isn't about wealth or power. It's about standing your ground when no one else will. What would you have done in Tom's place? Would you have fought back? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this moved you, hit like, subscribe, and join us here at Embrace the Journey for more stories that make you feel something real.